Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. So next up, unfortunately, it's kind of a talky video, but I think it's kind of important stuff. I want to give you my top 10 things that every new woodworker should know. So let's just dive right in. So number one on my list is, where do you get your lumber from? If you're buying lumber like this from the big box store, I promise you are paying way more than you would be if you go find a local hardwood dealer. Most areas have them. There's lots of online options as well, but I would get away from the big box store for buying your lumber. You'll get much better selection and much better pricing from an actual hardwood dealer than you will at that big box store. I also tend to stay away from Rockler and Woodcraft and stores like those as well, because I find their prices to be a little bit inflated. But quality hardwood is something you have to have. I would also say find a local sawmill that will cut lumber for you, but make sure it's dried properly and all that good stuff. So at the end of the day, get away from the big box store and find a good supplier for your hardwood lumber. So next up on my list is what I call the big three. I think it's very important for a lot of the woodworking we do to be able to mill your own lumber flat and square. Just because you go buy quality hardwoods from a hardwood dealer, even if you're buying S4S material, does not mean it's going to remain flat and square. So the big three are the table saw, the planer, and then the jointer. And in that order. Now, you don't have to have the bigger machines like I have, but you need to have the ability to mill your own lumber flat and square. The reason I say in that order is because there's a lot of things that you can do and get away with without a joiner that you can't get away with without the table saw or the planer. So that's the order, but the joiner is also very important. The joiner makes one side flat and gives you a square edge to that. The planer makes the opposing face parallel, and then the table saw finishes everything off and gives you perfect square. So what comes after the big three? It's a fair question. I think that kind of depends on the kinds of projects that you build. You know, is it a bandsaw and a chop saw? Is it a drill press and a router table? Is it a drum sander? Is it a domino? It solely depends on the kinds of projects that you build. But I'm going to talk about that more here in just a minute. So next up for me is, buy the tool you need, not necessarily the tool you think you want. Let the projects you're building dictate what tool you need to purchase next. So as your skills improve, so will your tool arsenal. But more importantly than that, the tools that you've purchased aren't just wall decorations to look good in your shop. They're tools that you actually use, you know how to use, and they come in handy on nearly every project. Additionally, buy the best you can afford. Even if that means you have to save for a little while, get the best bang for your buck, but get the best tool that you can afford. Also, even if you're a power tool user, don't forget about these great hand planes and tools. They really add to the fit and finish of your projects. Remember, if you spend more time fighting your tool than using your tool, you probably made the wrong selection. And lastly, on this subject, I often get asked, should I upgrade this tool or should I purchase this tool? And my advice is always the same. If you have a tool that is functioning, buy the tool you don't have. If you have a tool that's not functioning, then that's not the tool for your shop, and perhaps you should consider that one first. But typically speaking, I always advise to buy the tool you don't have versus upgrading something that's working. So next up on my list is, I get asked all the time, which battery tool should I purchase? Which one is better? I'm going to tell you straight up, most of the major players are all fairly comparable, and it's kind of hard to go wrong with any of them. Now, I'm pretty heavily invested in the yellow stuff, but the red stuff works just as good, so does the orange stuff, so does the green stuff. They all function and they do just fine. So my suggestion is always the same, and that is to stay in your battery family. The fewer chargers you have and the less clutter you have in your shop. And that's especially important in a small shop. Okay, so next up on my list is a real pet peeve of mine, and that is these bird's mouth push sticks. Get rid of them. They're junk. They're unsafe in my opinion. They provide only support in the back of the board. So if this were to get pinched and kick, there's nothing there to hold this piece of material down. These are junk. Go to a more long style push stick. This one is a shop-made one, but when I put that on there, now I have good control over the front of this, and I'm less likely to see a kickback coming back at me. I will also say there's a lot of manufacturers out there for push sticks. Some of them are gimmicky, some of them are pretty legit. I prefer to make my own because I get it exactly how I want it and it works great. I'm not spending the money. It's shop scrap, and I make this style, which is just a handle, and then I have a little tab on the bottom for pushing through. And when these get knurled up, because you do hit the blade with them, I just take them to the bandsaw and I clean up the edge and I glue a new button on, and it's still used. This particular one in my shop, if you guys have watched me for any length of time, has been here for a lot of years. And I didn't spend a ton of money on some of those more gimmicky products. Next up for me is learning to use your tools properly. Like many of you, I watched a lot of Norm Abrams, and that was a big push that he always had, and it was solid advice then. It's still solid advice today. So, learn which way your router bit turns and not to climb cut. Learn not to put end grain into your planer. Remember to not use a miter gauge and your fence at the same time because it could pinch the workpiece. There's so many of those things that come into play that you really need to learn and understand your tools before you go to using them. So I realize that there is a lot of information out there, especially with YouTube and social media stuff, about the proper way to use these tools. My suggestion there is try to find a mentor. If you have somebody locally for you that has a lot of experience in this stuff and can help guide you, that is obviously the best way to learn. But if not, sift through those online content creators and find one that you trust and stick with them. Oftentimes you can reach out to them and they will answer your questions. I know for me, I try to answer all the questions that come my way, so feel free to reach out. I've even had a couple of newer woodworkers here in the shop and helped guide them through some projects, and it was a fantastic experience for me as well, and I think that they got a lot out of it. So find that source for you where you know that you're getting reliable information and not just relying on the internet to tell you things that could potentially be wrong. Now on that note as well, if something seems really outlandish and you don't know if you should do that, you probably shouldn't. Additionally, there's some great books out there with some great content in it. I'm going to link some in the show notes for you, some that our forum members have recommended and some that I know of, but they're always a great source of information and good information, not outlandish stuff that you see on the internet. And the last thing I'm going to offer with any of these tools and anything in the shop is don't get complacent. Have your head in the game anytime you're using these tools. Be focused on that task at hand and really concentrate all the way through the end of the task. Don't get sidetracked. Don't be thinking 2 steps ahead. Be focused on that task at hand. None of these tools in this shop are designed to not hurt you. So be respectful, but be masterful over your tools in your shop. So next up for me is what I call the don't be a hater rule. You're about to go on social media forums, you're going to be finding videos like this, you're going to be in other forums and all kinds of stuff on social media, and you're very quickly going to find that there are a lot of people out there that have a lot better tools than you have or a lot bigger shop than you have, and that's okay. They're just at a different point in the journey than you are. You're just starting out, and chances are they started, as did I, in a very similar place to where you are now. Remember, this is a journey, not a race. Remember to utilize these folks because they've already made the mistakes that you're about to make. Reach out to them and look for advice or ask questions. That's all great stuff and what those forums and social media platforms are really for. So as I mentioned earlier, this hobby can be a real money pit. Do not expect to get rich off of this hobby. Do it for the love of the hobby, not for the income that can be generated from this hobby. Very few people get rich in this hobby. There are a bunch that make a living at this hobby, and there's a very big difference between those two. Obviously, you're going to make some pieces and sell those pieces, and that's great. But price it accordingly. Price your projects that's fair for you. The cost of materials plus the number of hours you spent at a reasonable hourly rate, and then add a little bit into the end for the overhead, the lights and sandpaper and all that kind of stuff. And that's what that project is worth. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that that's what your local market will bear in paying for that price. So you may need to find cheaper materials to make that out of. This particular one is made in walnut, so maybe you need to go to a painted piece, and that works really well for where you're located. You'll have to decide what your market is for you. I think it's really important that you don't undervalue your work. You spent that hard-earned time and materials in putting that piece together, and if you undervalue your work, you're essentially paying somebody to take it from you. So this dives back into some of the tool stuff that we talked about a little earlier as well. So maybe buying a particular tool helps you make a particular piece much faster, therefore lowering your costs, and therefore you can lower your price point. So sometimes those tools increase the value because they speed up your process. You don't always have to look to cheaper materials to lower your cost. So down below in the show notes, there is a link to my website. And if you go over to the free plan section, I actually have a quote estimating tool. It's an Excel spreadsheet, and I left everything open in there for you. Feel free to grab it, make a copy, do whatever you want to it, and change the numbers up to fit what you need. But it's a great tool for estimating what to charge for a particular project. If you go back to the nightstands builds, I think I went through that there a little bit. But if there's interest in it, I will do a video solely on how I use that cost estimating tool and to estimate prices for your projects as well. Like I said, it's all wide open. I didn't lock any of the cells out, so you can change your hourly amount, you can change the prices of your material, you can change all that stuff to fit what you need. Again, show notes for link to my website, free plan section, and get that quote tool. So the next piece of advice that I always give to new woodworkers is find a way to stretch yourself. Find a new technique, find something you have not done before, and incorporate that into your next project. Maybe it's a mortise and tenon, maybe it's a dovetail, maybe it is whatever it is, incorporate that into your next project. Just because you don't know how to do it, you go learn how to do it, you practice at it, and practice, and then you incorporate that into a project. Now your confidence level is still going to be low. So my best advice is to try those new techniques on some shop furniture, and before you know it, you have some pretty killer shop furniture. Okay guys, so my last bit of advice for a newer woodworker is knowing when to recognize that things aren't going right for you in the shop on a particular day and step away from the project. This particular project had some sliding dovetails in it and required me to make a fairly simple jig to create those sliding dovetails. After my third mistake on a jig, now granted this is all shop scrap, so nothing really hurt there, I walked away from this project that day, and this was actually something I needed to get done, but I wanted it to be done right. And if I'd have damaged something because I didn't step away and get my head back in the game, then I could have been starting this project all over and ultimately lost more time. Additionally, we all get into pretty much creative funks in the shop as well. And sometimes it's hard to come up with those ideas and find the inspiration and the motivation to get out to the shop and produce cool projects like this one. That's a good time to step away from the shop, go hit your social media sites, just clear your head for a day or two. That's okay, and something will strike you and draw you back into the shop to create great projects again. By not stepping away in either of these instances, you could potentially obviously damage the workpiece that you're working on, or heaven forbid you could potentially get hurt with a tool in your shop because your head's not in the game at the time and things are going wrong. So that's my final bit of advice, is to know when to step away and take a breather. That's okay to step away and take a breather. We don't all have to be production machines cranking out product like there's no tomorrow. So step away from a project. Okay guys, so there you go. I hope you got something out of that video and found some useful tidbits in there that can help you with your woodworking projects. And until next time, take care.